All right, today's agenda, we just went through introductions and housekeeping. Patrick is going to talk about disability at a high level, and then we're going to hand things over to Barb to talk about disability in the workplace and SHRM and some of the resources that they offer. Then Patrick will give his best accessibility best practices that you can take to your organization to promote inclusivity and accessibility at your workplace. And finally, we'll wrap up with some conclusions and then get into Q&A. All right, so please allow me to introduce our presenters today. Please welcome Barb Holland, SHRM CP and Knowledge Advisor at SHRM, and our special guest here today, along with Patrick Sturdivant, VP and Principal Strategy Consultant here at Deque. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Patrick.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Sturdivant. I'm excited to come to you guys this afternoon to talk about NDEAM. I'm coming to you guys from San Antonio. My pronouns are he, him, his. And for those of you who may not have vision, I am wearing a dark gray Deque shirt, polo shirt. I am also a screen reader user. So let's just jump right in and talk about disability. What is disability? It's a physical or cognitive condition that limits a person's independent movement, senses, or activities. That's kind of the definition of it. I'm sure most of you here probably know what disability is. We can flip it around the other way. It's just another way to talk about people's great abilities and their unique talents to do things like I like to talk about in just a little bit different way. We're not disabled. We just have skills that some people don't realize. So I think, Grace, you got up here some great statistics on disabilities you guys can review. One of the things I want to point out is if you're new to this space, 1 in 5, 20% roughly, the US population has some form of a disability. It's the largest minority anyone can join at any time. Any one of us could have a disability, either permanent or temporary, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, at any time in their life. As you age, the prevalence or likelihood that you're going to have a disability increases. I like to tell people, if you are lucky, you will get a disability, because that means you may have lived to the ripe old age of 100 and you finally got a disability. So, you know, you want to join the cool kids on the block, and at some point in your nice, long, extended, long life, you're going to have a disability. So let's quickly run over the different types at a high level of the disabilities. Vision issues have a wide variety, from totally blind, like I am, low vision, meaning you have some vision, but not perfect vision, color blindness, hearing issues. You know, when you talk about disability and hearing, at least for me, you immediately think of deaf. And deaf, no hearing is definitely a disability, but there are a lot of people, and I never really knew this till after I started getting into this field, that people would come up to me and talk to me about hard of hearing. There are just so many people out there that are hard of hearing, and you really don't know about it because it's hard to really tell. Motor hand dexterity, you know, having trouble with fine motor skills using a mouse, for example. Cognitive disabilities, a very wide spectrum there on all different types of issues with cognition. And then speech. We also sometimes forget about this, which is the either the inability to speak or to speak potentially with a stutter, which in the technology world, if you're really into all the latest and greatest gadgets, and you know who, that wonderful person from Echo or Amazon, I'm not going to mention their name, it relies on, you know, speech that can be understood. So the last thing I want to say about disabilities, and I really want to push this hard because I think it's a very important thing to remember, not all disabilities are visible. I want everybody to repeat that internally. Not all disabilities are visible. You may walk by someone at the grocery store and you may look at them and say, they don't have a disability, when they may, and you just don't know it. So don't always presume that someone doesn't have a disability. Real quick, we're going to short-term, long-term disabilities. That's pretty easy, but I want to make sure there's no miscommunication. Long-term disabilities, there's no prognosis of a change. For example, I'm totally blind. I've had vision issues since I was born, and I'm never going to see. At least if I can see before I move on, then I'll be really impressed because I need a lot of help in the vision department. Short-term disabilities, someone who may have a broken arm or a sprained wrist and can't properly use a keyboard or write. That broken arm or wrist will heal and get better and the disability will go away. So that's short term. So now let's move on to why we're here. I'm really excited. This is national. It's October. If you didn't notice, it's still October. Yes, we have a few days left. Halloween coming up. I'm sure you guys are all excited. It's National Disability Employment Awareness Month. It's a great month because it's the month that we get to educate people on what it's like to be disabled and be employed. It's the right time to celebrate all those people who are disabled and employed and encourage people to either be, who are disabled to become employed or employers to look at hiring the disabled. So NDEAM actually started in 1945 by the US government to promote the hiring of disabled veterans coming back from World War II. So NDEAM started as a week-long celebration. It's moved to a month, and it's been around for a very long time. Now, every year, the Department of Labor puts a theme on NDEAM, and this year, like every year, we have a great one. America's Recovery. I'm sure that relates to COVID. Powered by inclusion, very important words, powered by inclusion. So why is it important? To me, even though October is the month we celebrate it, National Disability Employment Awareness, if you just look at the first four letters, can be celebrated or reflected upon every day of the year. Any day is a great day to find a way to employ the disabled and get them engaged and have purpose in life and be productive. That's what I think what we all want. Can you imagine what it'd be like if you could not be productive and have purpose in life? At least for me, that would drive me nuts if I couldn't. So this is the great time to educate and to bring up that conversation with coworkers and people in the community, both whether they have a disability or not. Remember, disability impacts 1 in 5. So even though people who may not have a disability may think that they're not impacted, they know people. They're surrounded by people with disabilities. You cannot get away from it. They're just too large of a segment of the population. So having that conversation, having that awareness, I think it's quite interesting that I still get when people meet me, like if I'm getting into a lift to get a ride somewhere, or I'm going into a doctor's office, or I'm going into a new environment, and they meet me for the first time and they realize that I'm totally blind. One of the common questions they ask me is, well, what do you work? It's like, well, yeah, everyone works, at least I think so. I mean, I would hope so. The common thing is, I think the first thing that comes in people's minds when they see someone with a disability, and this is just my experience, is that you don't work. And if you do, that's something special, and that's wrong. We need to flip that around. The common thing should be, oh, they're disabled, they're working. It should be the exception that we aren't working. So why do organizations need to be aware of NDEAM and work towards disability inclusion? It's really important. The organization will be more innovative, they'll be more inclusive, it's important for an organization that has customers to know their customer. And what better way to know their customer than to have employees who reflect that customer base? How else can you know how best to provide products and services to your customer base unless you have employees that can help you on that journey that have those same situations in life? So being an organization that's open and willing to look at hiring the disabled and retaining and promoting, because remember, it's not all just about hiring. You can't just hire and then forget. You got to keep promoting and retaining those disabled employees. So anyway, real quick before I let you go, there is a, I know, I know, yes, I'm getting you kind of your comments mixed in with my notes here, guys. So if you're wondering why ever so often I kind of pause just a second, it's because somebody's put something into the chat. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure there is a website called NDEAM.org. I don't know if we have it on the list or not. We'll have a resource slide coming up soon, but I do not want to, and it has a lot of great resources. It's going to have Laura play a great video real quick. Grace is now switching her screens.
Yep, just 1 second.
I can solve difficult problems for a Fortune 500 company.
I can run a successful business.
I can manage your home improvements.
I can publicize your message.
I can motivate your audience.
I can put my military experience to work for your company.
I can teach your children.
I can boost your bottom line.
I can add value to your workplace.
I could be a loyal and productive employee.
But I can't put my skills to work for your organization
if I'm not given the opportunity.
If you don't recognize my talents and ability.
If you don't hire me.
If you don't have an open mind and a workplace that's open to everyone.
If you don't realize that America works best when everybody works.
What can you do?
What can you do?
What can you do?
You can remember that it worked.
It's what people can do.
It's what people can do that matters.
Nearly 50 million Americans have disabilities. Capitalize on their talents with employment practices that benefit everyone. Learn more at whatcanyoudocampaign.org.
Thank you, Grace. I hope you guys enjoyed that short video that comes to us from the Department of Labor. But anyway, just a few quick items. If you want some ideas on how to celebrate National Disability Employment Awareness Month, like I said, you can try ndeam.org. You can might want to think about posting that you attended this webinar on your social media to promote just the concept to people that there is this month, and we're celebrating the month of disability employment. Talk about it in your organization, or maybe at your staff meeting. Bring it up to say, hey, I attended that great webinar, and this is what I learned. If your organization doesn't have an employee resource group focusing on disabled, you might want to talk to your leadership about setting one up. Or if they have one, you might want to get more involved. Now, I would love to turn it over now to Barbara from SHRM. Barbara, take it over.
Thank you, Patrick. So as a quick introduction for those of you who may not be familiar with SHRM, SHRM is a Society for Human Resource Management, and our goal is to create better workplaces where employers and employees can thrive together. We have over 300,000 HR business executives and members in 165 countries, and we impact the lives of more than 115 million workers and families globally. What does diverse hiring, what is it all about? First of all, just from a kind of a background, employers have a moral and legal and economic reason to employ individuals with disabilities. When you do bring people with, and we like to use the term different abilities. When you bring people from different cultures and experiences, this brings in broader ideas and thoughts. I think we're all aware of this with the movement with diversity and inclusion. Diversity is including, typically many think of the protected classes. So those might be your age, race, national origin, gender. Those are the common things we think about. But as Patrick said earlier, the minority group of disabled people is actually the largest minority group because it spans everything of Title VII. Title VII plus ADA. And so this is a very large segment of the population which many employers have not tapped into. And in a time when talent is, many employers are looking for talent, there is a shortage of workers. This is a huge talent pool that could be very much overlooked. Approximately 22% of the population in the United States have disabilities. And so this is a very large segment that employers, as I said, can tap into. Disability does not mean inability. It means different ability. And sometimes those different ideas and creative thoughts come and are born out of a necessity. And so those with different abilities can come to an organization with ideas, creative thoughts that can not only, as Patrick said, represent the customer base that you may be working with, but they're going to be able to possibly bring better ideas or thoughts on how to benefit the organization. And so I'm going to be covering some of the myths around hiring those with different abilities, because I think that's one of the large barriers for many organizations, are fears of maybe they haven't hired a lot of people with different abilities. And so there's thoughts or concerns around that area. In addition to bringing workers with disabilities into the workplace, we have discovered through studies and surveys that when you hire people with disabilities, there's actually a lower turnover rate. Walgreens has had a committed program for employees with disabilities for quite some time, and they reported that their turnover rate was half of that of others when it came to individuals who had disabilities. UPS reported that 85%, they had an 85% retention rate for people with disabilities. And Accenture, who did a research on organizations supporting people with disabilities, discovered that 28% organizations had 28% higher revenue. They had 2 times the net income and 30% higher economic profit margins. So there's a real incentive for hiring people with different abilities. What are some of the risks that you might run by excluding people? Well, in addition to the things I just talked about, which could be increased revenue and a potential innovation, we're in a time where our workers are very conscious, socially conscious, and they want to work for organizations who are looking to better the world, who are looking to benefit their community and to benefit consumers. And so the organizations that have this focus are workers are drawn to those organizations. And some of our good workers who are coming up in the ranks now that are, in their early 20s and 30s and 40s are people who are very socially conscious. And so that is there's a great commitment in that generation of workers. In addition to moral and maybe economic reasons for hiring, there is a legal one, and that's the ADA. The Americans with Disabilities Act does require that employers make reasonable accommodations to include this segment in the workforce. And so intentionally focusing on inclusion with the disabled community really turns into be a win-win for all. You can change slides, Grace. Thank you. So I want to focus a little bit about creating disability awareness in the workplace. This is an area that I think will go a long way for changing the culture and creating a more inclusive workplace. According to a study in 2019 by the Employees' Abilities at Work Research, we found that only 13% of the workplaces had actually a U.S. disability-specific inclusion initiative. And more than half of the managers had not participated in any disability inclusion training. So there's a lot of room for us to improve and grow. Some of the steps that we can think about might be to start with ensuring that your company meets or exceeds accessibility standards. And some of those include physical needs. Are there ramps, accessible restrooms, braille signage, technology needs, direct or assistive technology that, that employees can utilize, accessibility and attitudinal awareness. So how do people interact with people who have disabilities? There's an etiquette around talking and working with people. If somebody has a guide dog, you know, you don't just walk up and start petting the dog. It's not a pet. It is there as a support and a worker for that person with that disability. So learning just the etiquette about how to interact with people so that you're not offending is a good place to start as well. So focusing in these areas can demonstrate a commitment to inclusion and ensures that practices and procedures at the work sites are equally accessible for current employees as well as potential hires. Another thing that you can do is start looking at what are you doing around awareness with your current employees. So paying attention to those that you may have hired that have disabilities that you visually can see, and celebrating what they bring to the organization. And as Patrick also said, think about creating an employee resource group. ERGs raise awareness and can demonstrate inclusivity of potential candidates because of the influence they have in an organization. It's also good to think about what barriers may be in the workplace that are possibly keeping people from applying for a job or being successful in an organization. So looking at job descriptions, and are there things in the job descriptions that might exclude candidates with disabilities? Is the job application page accessible for all? Can a screen reader easily read aloud the text for somebody who's visually impaired? Do images include descriptions, and are they video captioned? You know, make sure there's a clear, easy to find statement that your organization provides reasonable accommodations for employees and applicants. These are just 3 simple steps that an employer can begin looking at and kind of assessing how they're doing the areas of employing and making an inclusive workplace for those with disabilities. Talked a little bit about perceptions about disability, and I think many of the myths that are out there is what possibly causes organizations to maybe step a little bit slowly or cautiously into the concerns around hiring people with different abilities. Some of those are that, you know, maybe it's too expensive to hire or recruit somebody to the organization. But according to many HR managers and executives who have hired and who do have disability-focused programs, 87% of the respondents indicated a positive return on investment when hiring people with disabilities. Another myth, people with disabilities are not able to do the type of the work my organization has. And this belief comes from a lack of understanding about what constitutes a disability and what kinds of accommodations exist. Invisible disabilities, those which you don't see, especially tend to be ignored by employers. And other areas, people with disabilities might make my customers or my employees uncomfortable. And actually, the truth is that organizations who invest in employing individuals with disabilities cite improvements in their organizational reputation, and these are key drivers, both of which correlate to positive customer statements. Under the law perspective, there's not only the American with Disabilities Act federal law, but there are also state laws that provide protections for employees with disabilities. The ADA sets the threshold at 15 employees and higher. However, some states have as low as 2 employees and more there is a legal obligation to provide protection for those with disabilities. So it's important to know that it's not just federal law, but it's also state law for many of the states. So moving to how to foster inclusivity at your organization, and I have 3 ideas around this area. First is to, what are the accommodations you're doing for employees right now? Employers can follow the ADA even if they're not required to do so. So if you're a small organization of less than 15, the ADA provides really great guidance on, and SHRM provides great guidance on how to comply with the ADA, but you don't have to be 15 employees. I have many small employer members who will call and ask for guidance on how to do it because the ADA provides information on, what is the interactive process? How do we determine what kind of an accommodation might need to be made? When is that accommodation an undue hardship and when might it not be? The Job Accommodation Network is a great tool for employers when they're trying to figure out what is the accommodation an employee may need. And so first off, starting with, what are the accommodations we might want to do or need to do with our own staff. The other area that I mentioned earlier is employee resource groups. Only 4% of the US workers identify as having a disability, and yet we know that 22% of the American workers have disabilities. So there's a big gap between those who identify and those who have. And so establishing an employee resource group can be a great way of raising awareness, especially if you have leadership who is willing to be transparent about their own disability and can champion the awareness within an organization. This can help other workers who might be a little bit fearful or concerned about making others aware that they have a disability. Can open up those lines of communication and create a more inclusive work environment and culture. And then the third area that I would say would be a great place to look would also be, what are your company policies around disability hiring? Currently, according to a study by the National Organization on Disability, 13% of companies have reached the Department of Labor's target, and this is the DOL target of 7% disability representation in the workplace. It's a very low representation in the workplace given the number of people who have disabilities, and yet only 13% of our companies actually have reached this goal. So we have a lot of room to grow. And so even though this is Disability Awareness Month, it doesn't end here. It needs to go on. And this is a great place to look at, is what are our recruiting needs? What are our hiring practices? Are we training our managers to be able to interview and speak well with candidates who may have differing abilities? So with that, I will pause and pass it back to Patrick.
Thanks, Barb. So let's continue that conversation and talk about hiring and employment, and what you can do to be inclusive and bringing down barriers and just making the whole thing a whole lot smoother and easier. I guess the first thing we want to talk about is, how do people with a disability learn about your opportunities, career offerings? How do they apply? And how do they request an accommodation if they need it for that hiring process? Is your website accessible? Are your job listings accessible? Can someone who uses assistive technology see the jobs, complete an online application successfully? All those things you need to look at. Many times companies, their first thought is, we need to make sure we have good accessibility for our customers, because that's important, and it is very important, don't get me wrong. But I think they go there and they work on that, and they try to get really good at that, and they forget that they also have people trying to get jobs who also, in a sense, can be customers coming through that front end, that public side, that you need to make sure that that space is very accessible also. So that's something to think about, the entire process, including the talent folks who do the interviewing, the hiring managers. Resources need to be made available so that if a manager is going to be interviewing someone, they have some resources they can be helped on how to to accommodate. So if you're not sure about how your front end pages for jobs and forms and getting hired are doing, one of the best things you can do is go to deque.com and pull our Axe DevTools product down, which is free, and just run a quick automated test on one of your job pages and see how you're doing. And if you got questions, you can always reach out to us. Let's see here. Once you got someone hired, that's a great first step. But the next step is you want to keep them hired. You want to retain them. You want to promote them. You want them to be successful in that job. And in order for you to do that, your internal systems software needs to be accessible. And if it's whether it's built in-house or you purchase it, it all needs to be accessible. That includes also things like internal communications, videos, especially if they're or large meetings. If you're going to stream those, they need to be accessible. You need to provide captioning. If you're going to be putting out PowerPoint slide decks, they need to be accessible. Same thing with Word docs. Other communications need to be all accessible. If you're purchasing software, you need to be sure that your procurement department is up to speed with what accessibility is, because you want them buying products that are accessible. Your procurement people need to know what questions to ask. They need to know how to evaluate companies to see if they are meeting the requirements and they have an accessibility statement and their tools are going to be compatible and that language is written into those contracts. So kind of stepping back over to the in-house built side of the picture. If you build a lot of internal facing content, you need to make sure that those people building that content, whether they're designers, developers, testers, they have the right knowledge and training. So you might want to consider providing them accessibility coaching until they're up to speed and comfortable with how to ensure that their content is accessible. It's all about awareness, communicating at all levels, and making sure that whether the person is creating content, consuming content, or just a general employee, they have some awareness of disability, the importance of it, accessibility, why it's important, and why it promotes inclusion. Let's see here. What? Okay. Let's step back over into training. Very important. Training, especially role-based training, so that the right people in the right roles get the right type of training. A developer may need very specific training on how to create the right content. Someone answering the phone may need different kind of accessibility or disability awareness training. All of that is available in different ways. You can have instructor-led, either in person, hopefully next year, virtual, or you can actually do online training. An example of that would be Deque University that we make available to you guys. So anyway, one of the last things I want to mention is, if you're not sure where to start, you're kind of out there and you want to change your organization, you want to bring in a culture change, you want to be more inclusive, but it's just overwhelming and you don't know what to do and you got questions and you want a plan. How about a custom blueprint of what's the next step, where to go with resources, and kind of have someone hold your hand as you transform your company into a very inclusive company for the disabled? What you can do is look at hiring a consultant such as myself to help strategize, plan, and document how to do it, and have us there with you as much as you need to get you through that and get you comfortable to move to that next level. So that's also available. Now, in conclusion, Disability affects over 1 billion people in the world. It's everywhere. We can't ignore it. What we can do is promote it and make it something is natural, because disability is natural. It's a part of living, and you can't ignore it. So promoting digital accessibility really does help everyone. Many times I have seen where we go in and we help people to make something more accessible. And not only does it make it more accessible for the disabled, it makes it more accessible for everyone. And that reminds me of one of my favorite sayings, which is, we all do better when we all do better. It's just that with good digital accessibility, providing inclusion, we all reap the benefits of it, even though we first maybe go in there trying to solve a problem for someone with a disability. At the very end, we come out and it's helped everyone. So this conversation is year long. We talk about it in October, but we definitely need to continue that conversation in November and December and all the way into the next year until we join again next year in October. So don't give up on disability inclusion. So now I'd like to turn it over to Barbara to give her conclusions.
Sure. I would say the takeaway from today would be, look at your practices, build accessibility into your practices, consider, looking at the vendors you use, content, training your team members on how to create and sustain accessible experiences. Make small changes. Don't feel like you have to start with, the whole picture. Make some small changes to help individuals feel more included and accepted in the workplace. Look at your policies, review what resources you have, and start there. If you have a DEI program or initiative, make sure disability is included in that. Diversity and inclusion, the battle around diversity and inclusion is only going to be won when people are seen as multifaceted in their social identities. I'm not just a woman. I am not just somebody from America or whatever all of those different pieces that describe me are. I'm not just that. If I have a disability, that's part of who I am. And when we look at the whole person, we're going to be able to make a more inclusive workplace where people all feel welcomed to bring their whole self to the organization. So I would say keep these things in mind and seek out resources, continue the conversation around disability and accessibility. We all know that goals are better achieved when they're written down. So I would say take 5 minutes at the end of today's webinar and write down a goal or a first step that you can take towards building a more accessible and inclusive workplace for employees and candidates with different abilities.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Barb. What I have on the screen right here are some additional resources that we've put together for everybody. These will be all linked in the slide deck, which will be sent around via email. But let's save this last couple minutes of our presentation and get to your questions. So first question we have here reads, is there a recommended website or resources that list preferred terminology and phrasing around disability? For example, people of all abilities versus people with disabilities versus a disabled person. This person says, I want to make sure that when we're writing a program and training descriptions that we're using the preferred language.
Laura, I have a resource for that, for a style guide that points that out. If I get that to you, can you put it in the notes, and when we send it out, they'll have it?
Absolutely.
Because that was just updated about a month or two ago, and I've got that. I can get that to you.
Awesome. So we'll include that in the slide deck as well for our participants here. All right, next question. Do you have tips on how to ask if someone needs accommodations on a job post, resume, or even once they're hired, while still being within ADA law for their privacy?
I'll let Barb start with that one.
Sure. Well, if you can see that somebody has a visible disability, it's certainly just an ask is, do you need an accommodation? Is there anything that I can, provide that, during an interview or if they come on board? For individuals where it's an invisible disability, I mean, often we'll find this on a job application. Can you perform the essential functions of the job with or without a reasonable accommodation? So it's not that you have to ask every applicant or bring it up, because actually that would be a concern, because it could actually open up the door to running afoul of ADA, where somebody might actually reveal a disability when they're not required to do so. So I think, making your forms showing that you are trying to be an inclusive organization, having language in different places on your website, on your applications, and how you approach, I think will likely be enough. And if that's there, if somebody needs an accommodation, they will speak up and they will let you know they need that. Patrick, do you have other thoughts on that?
No, that was really good. Yeah, just give them the opportunity, show that you care, make it available, and then let them reach out.
Excellent, thank you. So another question, I think, for Barb, what kinds of resources or certifications or training could somebody pursue with SHRM around the topic of disability?
Thank you for asking that question. So the SHRM Knowledge Center, which is the team that I am on, we are a team of HR professionals, and we not only can provide through our website ADA materials, but there's an advisor who will speak with members who have questions around accommodating, helping employers become more aware and further their education. Our SHRM Foundation has created a credential called Employing Workers with Abilities. It was launched originally back in 2019, and they are refreshing it right now. We expect to have it back out sometime in the first quarter of 2022. It is a free certification, and I went through the first one in 2019, and it is a great program. It talks about hiring. It talks about the things that you can do. It gives you very hands-on information. It also gives you connections to the community, many organizations who can support you in a disability effort. So I would say, and that's free to anybody. So the SHRM Foundation, Employing Workers with Abilities, I will plug that for the early 2022, because I think it would be a wonderful single source education that could be very helpful.
Great. All right, here's a good question. How do you drive cultural change in an organization when you're not in a leadership position?
Oh, I'll start and then Barb can fill in. You definitely do not need to be in a leadership position. In many ways, I think you could be in a better position. And you do this by starting up the top, at the bottom, at the left, at the right. You start everywhere. And you start by just having conversations with people and get to know people. And whether or not you have a disability, all you need to do is start talking, raising awareness, doing small things that grow to bigger things, that grow to bigger things. Learn about people. As you learn about people, you're going to hear they have a disability. They have a family member with a disability. You're going to start provoking those conversations. They're going to get excited. They're going to tell other people. It's going to start to grow. And the conversations will turn into larger events. It'll get noticed by more people, and you keep pushing that conversation and push it up and push it down. And don't be afraid to talk about it or to ask to have a conversation. You shouldn't be afraid to ask a leader to have a short conversation about what you're doing to help the organization move forward in disability inclusion. And most great leaders will welcome that ask and will invite you in, whether it's physical or virtual, to have that conversation, because they want their organization to get better and to grow, and they know it's important. And if they don't know that, keep plugging, because the next leader or a different leader will know that. you don't win with everyone. You have to be dedicated, motivated, and you got to be persistent. What did I miss, Barb?
I would say, you know, and look around. If you see things in the organization where somebody is struggling, maybe there's an accommodation that could be made and somebody's just not paying attention. Maybe the supervisor is not aware. Maybe the employee doesn't want to speak up because they're afraid to. Be an advocate for your coworkers who might need you to step in and raise awareness. So I think everything Patrick said is right on, and can start kind of that grassroots effort growing awareness. But look around, see how you can help somebody, and keep the conversation going and growing.
Fantastic. And as a piggyback onto that question, we have another question here that asks that this person's finding it difficult to keep reminding people to consult some of the accessibility best practices that this person's put together for their organization, and finding difficulty like actually applying it. So what tips would you give to this person who's looking to better embed accessibility best practices in their day-to-day?
I'll start, Barb, and you can chime in. If you're having trouble getting people to remember to do that, to me, that would be the best thing. And this does take some work. No one ever said that this work is easy. I'm going to start with that. It is not easy work. What I would try to do is to build some relationships with leaders and get them on board and solicit their help in having them send that email out to the organization as broad of a group as they can, to reinforce the importance of using that documentation in making those considerations and working for digital inclusion. And one message is not going to do it. Consistent messaging coming from leaders above, and if you can get it coming from all the way at the very top of the organization down, that would be even better. But you got to start small. You work your way up. When those consistent messages keep coming down through leadership, people start eventually to listen. But don't expect it to happen just with one message. Barb?
I would also look at what is written and what are the guidelines that are being recommended, and do they look good on paper, or are they hard to actually apply and implement? So make sure that what's written down is actually something that's doable. And so maybe looking at it, and if it's a big program and you're getting a hard time getting people to accept it, then maybe pick a piece out of that program that you're going to focus on. Let's say 1 month, we're going to focus on this area, this aspect, and then have managers look through their teams and look through their departments and say, how are we doing in this area, and start raising awareness little by little in maybe the various aspects of the program design.
And this is also something that Deque's strategic consulting services could help you with if you want to get some fresh eyes on those documents, on those programs, on those plans. We can come in and make suggestions to make it easier, to make sure that it's more accepting, and give you some pointers on how you can continue to promote and get people to be engaged. So we're here for you.
Excellent, thank you. So next question is around cognitive disabilities. So this person asks, how can my team better work with others with cognitive disabilities such as autism or even ADHD? Or if we don't know if someone does, how might we go about helping them?
Well, I would say, and I'm going to need Barb's help here, the first thing you can do is educate yourself. Cognitive disabilities are, for a lot of us, tough to understand. There's a lot of great material out on the internet and resources to learn, know what they are, and that way you can be most educated on how to help. And I'll let Barb fill in some of the blanks here.
Sure. The first I would say is, just as from a warning perspective, don't try to diagnose people with a cognitive disability. You might see certain traits being displayed in the workplace, but try to avoid labeling those traits. If you're seeing a performance concerns, address the performance concern. And certainly in a conversation, typically if there's a performance concern, there's a conversation that's talking about, okay, how can we help you to better perform? In that conversation, it could come up that maybe somebody is struggling with something, and then that could be an opportunity for talking about ADA reasonable accommodation. The job accommodation network is a great place to go if you are aware of somebody who has a cognitive disability, let's say autism, and they have information on their site on things that you can do to help somebody with autism to be more successful in the workplace. So there's resources to assist, but the first is being able to have that conversation with an employee so that you can give them the accommodation that's needed. That's where I would, I'll leave it at that for now.
Super, thank you. Now, Patrick, I think you're going to like this question. This person writes, we're finding a lot of businesses are now using overlays on their website to be legally compliant, but they can interfere with assistive technology. How do you go about explaining to these businesses that overlays are not solving all the issues and rather needs to be accessible from the source?
That's a really good question. And I agree 100% with that comment. And it is a tough one because most companies want the quick fix, and they're sold on this technology that makes the problem they think go away. And I think the best way is to be persistent, demonstrate what the failings are still existing, even though that has been implemented. And I'll tell you this personally, since I am a screen reader user too, I a lot of times will simply just refuse to use that. And because I shouldn't have to be using something different. And because normally what happens in my experience is, and you would have to explain this to the company, that tool sometimes makes things worse or very confusing. I've never seen it where it completely solves all the problems. So I think the best thing is, like anything, to educate. If you have the ability to document or demonstrate how it's not working and why you're still unable to use it, even though they have implemented that, that's probably the best way to persuade them or to change their mind and to get them to look at other alternatives other than using that technology.
Excellent. All right, a question in the chat here about tips on helping managers understand that accessibility needs to be built in and that it does take time to test. Any suggestions around helping management understand that?
It needs to be built in because if you build it in at the beginning, it's going to be cheaper. That's the bottom line. It's going to be cheaper when you start your project with accessibility in mind. It all just flows and it doesn't cost that much. As far as testing, you would never let something go out that's not tested. And in today's market, to do good testing, you test for your customers. Your customers have disabilities. So if you don't test for that 20%, you're letting 20% of your customers have a bad experience. I don't think any company wants that. So you can't go out and say, we're not going to test for digital accessibility because it's not important. It is very important, and it's a part of doing business now. This is about to be 2022, and we're still having conversations about needing to test for the disabled. People just need to accept this is the way business works now. Barb, what would you like to say about this?
Well, I would say, going back to the 22% of your potential market it's not just 22% that may have a bad experience. That 22,
they'll tell other people.
That's right. They have family, they have friends, they have a huge support network, and so that 22% grows rather quickly. Yeah,
it could go to 50%. So yeah, we're not going to test for those disabled people. We're just going to take off half of our customer base. That's basically what they're doing.
Yeah, it is a very large, you think about networking. I mean, this is a very large segment that has a large supportive segment. And if you think of that larger segment getting bad reviews or hearing about, a bad experience because of the technology, they're going to look elsewhere, because I'm sure that person is going to say, but here I found over here. And so it's going to shift attention from your product to somebody else's.
Well said. And Lindsay from the chat here just chimed in to say, given that 20% is the number of reported disabilities, the number of users experiencing disabilities is larger than that. So,
well, and I think the other important thing is when you do good testing and design for accessibility, remember what I said, it helps everyone. It helps everyone. You will see, you do this long enough, you see how accessibility helps people without disabilities. It doesn't happen the first time, but over time, as you do it and you watch it evolve, you will notice it.
Absolutely. Okay, we have probably less than 1 minute here, but I'm going to try to sneak in one more question. This person asked, what are the best resources for testing for digital accessibility?
I think the best thing is to start with is the thing that's most easily put in your hands, which is free, which is easy, which is just go to deque.com and learn about our Axe DevTools product extension that you can plug into your browser. Start with that. It's very reliable, no false positives. It's a proven leader in the industry, and it's free. There's no reason why you can't run automated tests. The automated tests aren't going to catch everything. There's still manual testing required, but the first step is automated testing. Do something, get the product, try it out.
Excellent. And just at that, we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank you, Patrick and Barb. Thank you so much for your presentation today and all of your efforts around this area.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thanks for setting this up, Laura.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming and for your great questions and your participation today. Please be on the lookout for the recording and the slides coming soon. Thanks so much. Have a great one.
Thanks.
Have a good day.